Quentin Tarantino went on Joe Rogan's podcast and he gave aspiring and beginning filmmakers some of the best advice. And he did it through a story. He told a story of his own experience, and it was incredibly impactful to me. And so I wanted to share it with you all. I wanted to talk about it. Let's go ahead and listen to some of this story that he's telling.
It's one of those things where it's like, well, this isn't my dream. This isn't what I wanted to do, working at a video store.
So to give you some context, he's telling the story about when he was working at the video store for years, for at least half of his 20s, and he's trying to figure out like what he needs to do next, right? He's trying to figure out like, I want to make a film someday, but how does it apply to me today in my mid-20s, right?
I wanted to actually make movies. It's not my dream what I'm doing, but it's dream adjacent. It's close to my dream. It's close to my dream. I get to watch movies all day. I get to talk about movies all day. I don't have to work at a pizza parlor. I don't have to. I'm not delivering pizzas. I'm not busting ass as a bartender. I'm not busting ass doing menial jobs. I mean, this is the kind of job I'd go to the store if I wasn't paid to go to the store.
How many of you relate to that? I totally relate to this on some level. It's like dream adjacent. This is sort of my dream. I get to talk about movies. I get to make films. Even on YouTube, like, to be very open with you, I have been talking about movies for so long on this channel, and I was like, hey, I've forgotten I also really like making movies myself. So even this is causing me to be a bit introspective about what type of content I'm creating, about who I'm having conversations with. And I'm just like, well, it's dream adjacent.
For a couple of years, it did put me to sleep.
It did
kind of put me to sleep. It put my ambitions to sleep for a little bit because I was happy enough.
Yeah.
So one of these days Right,
but you didn't have the fire.
I didn't have the fire. And when I got the fire, and it was a life-changing thing. It was a life-changing day. We had a buddy of ours named Steve-O.
Yeah.
We had different living arrangements. And at one point in time, me and Steve-O were living in the same house together. But now Steve-O was older than the rest of us. So if like, he was about like almost 5 years older than us, but he didn't seem like it. He was a young guy.
Yeah, like 5 years younger mentally or emotionally.
I remember I worked this one job. I had a dude who acted like me. I was 21, 22. And this guy was in his mid 60s, and he was as much of a goofball. He was as much of a recluse as I was. And I really resonated with him at work, but I didn't even stop to think about like his perspective, because he's got so much more life experience than I do. And we're all kind of like buddies, you know?
So he hits 30 and he starts changing. He starts changing like drastically. He was like one of the funniest guys I ever knew. And he was this really, really funny stoner dude and really cool. And all of a sudden he's like angry about things. And now he's not quite as funny. And now he's got this issue.
And this is like, he's really talking to me, because I am about to turn 30 this coming next year, 2025. I am going to be turning 30. Any story where someone's like, they turned 30 and then like changed or had some kind of thing go on, I'm like perking up. I'm like, oh, this is me, man. This is me.
And there's this one night that he's kind of disgusted with his life. And he starts ranting. He's describing a situation that was very common, where it's like, you can't get any really good jobs, but like you can work at Licorice Pizza. And if you're an okay employee, you could like work at Licorice Pizza for a couple of years, and maybe you could even become assistant manager or a manager. And maybe they send you to another store, and maybe you work there for 3 years, and that's really great.
Getting locked into a job because it's just good enough. The money's just good enough, and finding yourself in an environment that you feel like you can't escape from.
But then, all of a sudden, the district manager doesn't like you. You run afoul of somebody higher up in corporate, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're fired and you're out in the street. And so now you've just spent 3 years at Licorice Pizza. Now you could get a job at TRW or some place that's like a real job, or, well, those are kind of hard to get, but you can work at Warehouse Records and Tapes tomorrow because you just had 3 years at Licorice Pizza. Same thing with Wild West Clothier, same thing with Miller's Outpost, same thing with any of these kind of stores. Next thing you know, you're 28 And the only jobs you've ever had are minimum wage jobs behind a counter that were designed for kids to pay for their gas.
Ooh.
And
man, the majority of people are in these type of jobs too. And the thing is, he's saying stuff that's so real and so difficult to hear. Now, if you're like, hey, I don't have like a lot of ambitions, I'm pretty happy, I can pay for my bills, that's great. That's not really who he's talking to here. He's talking to people who had a dream, particularly for him, who had a dream of filmmaking, and he was stuck.
And you've like spent your entire 20s doing that.
And then you start getting bitter.
And you start getting bitter. But he was not just bitter about the job aspect of it. I knew he's telling me the truth. I'm learning something here. He goes, Quentin, you think that we're this really great team. We're this really great crew.
Mm.
Well, we are. I mean, this is that time of your 20s where like your group of friends or your family. Quentin, at 20, I worked at South Bay Cinemas and I hung out with a bunch of guys just like you.
Ooh.
And some girls there too. But it was a bunch of guys just like you. And then I stopped working at South Bay Cinema. Then I worked at Miller's Outpost. I hung out with a bunch of guys just like you. And we did everything just like we do. We went to movies together. We went out and we dated amongst the girls there, everything. Yeah. Then I worked at Leisure Pizza for 4 years with a bunch of guys just like you. I wasted my life hanging out with a bunch of guys just like you. And they all go away at a certain point.
Ooh.
And I realized this guy's kind of telling the truth. This is coming from somewhere. And then all of a sudden, he still hung around us. He still liked us. But then he started making it a point to touch base with some of his high school friends that were still around. So he's not just hanging out with guys 4 years younger or 5 years younger than him. I'm turning 25 around this time. So I'm having my own little, okay, well, what have I done with my life so far? So far, nothing. I'm having my own little anxiety hitting 25, but I'm seeing what it's like 5 years from now.
When you watch this, I feel like people can become inspired or depressed because what he's saying is like, it really resonates with people. When he's talking through this, there's like going to be two people's reaction, at least young people, even older people actually also, because you might be older than 30 and still in a situation where you feel stuck and you feel like you haven't done anything with your life. And that's not true. And it's not a healthy place to be in. But what it does is it does create motivation to really branch out and try something new. It doesn't matter at what age. It really doesn't matter at what age you do it. The point to this story is that you actually get started and you don't keep putting it off.
And there was like one night that I had what I used to call, I would do it every once in a while. I haven't done it in a long time, thankfully. I would have a Quentin Detest Fest where I'd stay up all night long. And rather than give myself excuses, I would look at everything that I'm up in my life or everything I'm not doing or whatever, and just not give myself any excuses out, just like nail it. And I would spend like all night laying out everything I'm doing that's wrong. And then I would spend the last 2 hours figuring out how I can change it.
Which I think this is healthy depending on what type of person you are. I do think that if you are prone to anxiety, this might be a rough one to go with. I'm not prone to anxiety, but I can have moments of real anxiousness. And I know there's a lot of people out there. I think that it's not so much about you should have a night and do a detest fest like he's saying. What you really should do is you should just start identifying 2 or 3 things like behaviors. It doesn't have to be all night because you're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to literally be so overwhelmed. It's going to bother you in a big way and it really could debilitate you. Don't necessarily do what he's doing, but what he's saying, the practice of identifying behaviors, identifying things in your life that you're not pleased with, and then starting to create solutions and implementing solutions, like that's where the power of what he's saying comes from.
I decided to change my life. And I was like, look, the problem is that I'm living in the South Bay. And even though I drive to Los Angeles, I got to not worry about this job anymore. I got to just move to Hollywood. I got to get involved there. I got to meet other people that are in the business. And if I have to work manpower jobs, where you just work like 4 days at this place and 4 days at that place, well, then that's fine. And by the way, I shouldn't be making money until I'm making money doing what I want to do.
Ooh, That's like something that a lot of people feel, especially in filmmaking, especially in creative endeavors when they're in their 20s. I think one of the biggest dangers, if you get into a job that you don't like and you start making pretty good money, you start thinking, "Oh, well, this is just life now." Like, my dreams were irrational. Like, the way the world really works is that I put dreams and ambitions aside in order to create someone else's vision to collect a pretty nice paycheck. So what he's saying is like a perspective we all have had. If you're a creative, ambitious person, we've all had that thought. It's like, I don't want to make real money until I'm doing what I love, until I'm doing my dream. And I'm not going to say that's right or wrong. I think honestly, people's temperaments are going to in some way predestine what the outcome of their dream fulfillment is going to look like. Everything he's saying is so human and so relatable. I know I'm not the only one feeling this way.
But then, the next thing I knew, I moved out of the South Bay, and then I couldn't move into Hollywood. I couldn't afford Hollywood, but I could afford Koreatown, and that was close enough. Literally, the minute I kind of moved out there, I met a guy who wrote low-budget horror movies, and then through him, I met other guys that wrote low-budget horror movies, and this guy who directs a few low-budget horror, and this guy who produces a couple. Yeah, you meet one person, and that introduces you to 3 other people. Now, all of a sudden, I actually knew people who were actually making movies. And the thing about it was like, well, if these guys can do it, I can do it. Because they weren't too special.
Right.
Yeah. That's the weird realization that you end up having.
Yeah. Literally, it wasn't like everything changed, but like within a year and a half from moving out of the South Bay and moving into the Hollywood area, I was finally able to make a living as a writer.
I think the one thing that's like not as relatable is the end of the story. It's like the application that he made. His application was move to Hollywood and get in proximity with people that are actually making movies. And then you come to discover you can fulfill your dreams because there's nothing special about the people who are fulfilling and doing the work that you dream of doing. Why not you? Is the mentality. And I think that's very valuable. I don't think the application of moving to LA is the right one because a lot of production in Hollywood doesn't happen in LA anymore. There's actually bigger areas. The UK is kind of coming up right now. I wouldn't recommend if you live in America to leave America, but you could also move to places like Atlanta, Georgia, because that is where a lot of productions are happening. So like New York and LA, there's a lot of productions. There's a lot of like office studios there, and there's still a lot of stuff that happens, but like to actually make it, it's where everybody is. There's so much more competition. So depending on what you want to do, you have to be in proximity with people that are doing what you want to do and make it clear for yourself. Write down exactly what you want it to look like, what sector you want to work in. For me, I really value indie filmmaking. I really value the individual creator and the freedom that comes with all of that. Also, it's a struggle fest. and I accept that. I know that, and I'm willing to live in that with the struggle because there's freedom in it. There's better creativity in it. And I think there's more quality people in it, if I'm being honest as well. But you have to define what you're going after. So after you identify behaviors that you're saying, hey, I feel stuck. I feel extremely stuck. And I don't want to regret when I turn 30. I don't want to regret when I turn 40. I don't want to regret when I turn even 50. Identify where the problems are. Start pursuing what you actually dream doing. And maybe working for someone else on production, maybe working for someone else in any field is your dream. You just want to, your dream was to be in proximity with something you love, to be behind a camera, right? To be in the kitchen with world star chefs. I don't know. Whatever it is, proximity over like you are the person doing it. But there are some people that just can't do it effectively. They're not going to be happy unless it's their vision, it's their dream. And I respect those people. And I also understand how much pressure that creates. And so get in proximity, build skills, start taking steps in the direction you actually want to end up, and identify the behaviors that's limiting you and make corrective behaviors. The opposite of that behavior is the corrective behavior. Don't just identify the bad ones and don't do anything about it. Actively implement the better behaviors. And I think you'll end up, maybe not with the exact dream that you envisioned, but you're going to end up, if not with your dream, very close to what you actually wanted to do. I hope this is inspiring for you all. I hope it was entertaining and inspiring. Leave a comment. Let me know exactly what you're feeling, what stage of life you're in, if this was valuable to you, or if you're like, hey, this is the right advice. I've already achieved my dream and I want other people to do the same. If you have advice, leave it in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.